All organizations have what is called an attack surface. This is the part of the organization that is exposed to any kind of threat. One of the biggest attack surfaces for most organizations is their supply chains and exposures to third parties. This attack surface is also one of the most challenging to protect. In this video, I'll cover what supply chain and third-party risks are and why they're part of the cybersecurity threat landscape. Every organization has suppliers. They provide the needed resources for that organization to function. These suppliers can be software as a service or other technology providers that are critical to your business. And these suppliers have their own suppliers, and those suppliers have suppliers, and so on. If a direct or downstream supplier fails, that could have a negative impact on your organization. That's the idea of supply chain risk. Now let's think about the access your suppliers and other third parties might have to your systems and data. If third parties like suppliers, contractors, and vendors need access to your systems to provide their services, that can create risk. For instance, if one of your vendors has access to your systems and they get hacked, now the hackers can attack your systems. This is what happened to a major retailer, which led to a security breach that cost an estimated $202 million. On top of that, consider all the data your organization stores with third parties. Cloud-based software as a service or SaaS applications like Dropbox, Salesforce, and Google Drive can store some of your organization's most critical data. And your organization may be storing its data with other third parties that aren't SaaS apps. If the right controls aren't in place, that data may be accessible to malicious actors outside or inside of your organization. Finally, we have software supply chain risk. Many organizations develop software for their own internal systems or to provide the services they offer. Instead of writing everything from scratch, developers will often use free open source software. But open source software comes with potential problems. It can be hard to keep track of, especially if your organization develops a lot of software. And open source software can contain vulnerabilities or even malicious code. For instance, an open source Java logging library called Log4j was used by software found on millions of servers around the world. But a zero-day vulnerability was found in Log4j, which allowed remote code execution attacks that could be used to compromise these servers. Every organization who developed its own software immediately needed to determine if any of their software contained Log4j, and if it did, patch it. As you can see, supply chain and third-party risks can be highly complex and have serious consequences for your organization. That's why they're an important part of the cybersecurity threat landscape. Most organizations rely on supply chains and grant access to third parties in order to provide their goods or services. But this supply chain reliance and third-party access can create a large attack surface that needs to be protected. Let's look at steps you can take to protect your organization against these supply chain and third-party risks. The best way to address third-party risks is to build a formal third-party risk management program, or TPRM. I'll give you a quick overview of what a TPRM might look like. First, you'll create an inventory of all your organization's third-party suppliers and vendors. You'll need to work with subject matter experts from across your organization to get this done. Second, determine which of these suppliers and vendors are critical to your business. Next, identify all third parties who have access to your data or systems. Then, based on their business criticality and access, assign risk ratings to each of these third parties. And finally, use these risk ratings to prioritize identifying alternatives to your critical suppliers and implementing third-party security controls. Here are some security controls that can help protect against risks associated with third-party access. Follow the least privilege principle to only grant third parties the access they need to do their job. Require third parties to use multi-factor authentication or MFA when accessing your systems. Monitor the activity of third parties when they access your systems with a secure information event management system or SIEM or other monitoring solution. Ensure any third-party access is revoked immediately when no longer needed. And take steps to verify that third parties have strong security controls in place, like reviewing their security certification documentation or requiring them to complete security questionnaires. Also, work with your legal team to require strong security controls in your contracts with third parties who have access to your data. As you can see, building a TPRM can take a lot of effort, and many organizations choose to outsource some or all of this work. But no matter how you tackle it, a good TPRM is the best way to manage and reduce many supply chain and third-party risks. When it comes to your software supply chain, here are some steps you can take to reduce the risk of vulnerable or malicious open source software being included in your organization's code. First, you should conduct software code inventories or audits. Work with your developers to create a software bill of materials or SBOM. This is a formal record that contains the supply chain relationships of the components used to build your organization's software. SBOMs are like the list of ingredients on a food package, and they can identify where open source software is used in your organization's code. You can find more information about SBOMs, including how to generate them, on the National Telecommunications and Information Administration website at ntia.gov/SBOM. There are also application security companies that can analyze your developer's code to generate SBOMs for you. Next, review the results of the SBOMs with your developers, focusing on the open source software. Confirm with them that all open source software components are still needed and have been updated as much as possible. And finally, consider implementing a secure development standard that restricts the use of open source software that hasn't been updated in years. Supply chain and third-party risks can be challenging to manage. Take what you've learned in this video to start implementing the controls that will help reduce these risks. In this course, I've described some of the most common cybersecurity threats you're likely to encounter. To best protect against them, your next step after watching these videos would be to figure out which of these threats apply to your organization. Then find out if the security controls for those threats are in place and apply any that are missing. By following the recommendations in these videos, you'll definitely reduce your exposure to these threats. But the challenge is, cybersecurity threats keep evolving to overcome even the best defenses. Just because you're secure today doesn't mean new threats won't be a problem tomorrow. So how do you keep up? Let's look at 3 actions you can take to keep ahead of cybersecurity threats. First, stay up to date with changes in the cybersecurity threat landscape. I recommend subscribing to security newsletters like SANS News Bites and Bruce Schneier's Cryptogram. There are a lot of weekly security podcasts that cover current cybersecurity threats like Security Weekly News and Defense in Depth. There are also plenty of cybersecurity magazines with articles about the latest threats like InfoSecurity Magazine and Cyber Defense Magazine. Next, to get a more in-depth look at cybersecurity threats, attend security conferences and seminars. Presentation topics will often explore current threats in detail. Conferences and seminars are also good ways to connect with security professionals who have first-hand knowledge of the latest cybersecurity threats and how they've dealt with them. Finally, hire security professionals who specialize in cybersecurity threat simulation and management. These include companies and consultants who conduct penetration tests, threat modeling, and DDoS simulations. I hope you use the knowledge you gain from this course to protect you and your organization from current and future cybersecurity threats.